Can someone confirm that you can see the PowerPoint presentation I have up?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, Kira.
Laura, that switched to your email instead of the presentation. Now it's back to the presentation. Thank you.
Kira, Ms. Sanchez is having some trouble signing on. Would you mind connecting with her? I will send you an email.
Not a problem.
Laura, this is Leanna. You're the PowerPoint. I'm not seeing the PowerPoint anymore. I just want to let you know. We have to reshare.
I know I took it down because I'm trying
Okay.
to do emails and trying to figure out help people get connected for a second, but yes.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for coming. This is Laura Arsenault. Just give us a couple minutes to troubleshoot and get some people signed on. I see we have a lot of attendees already. Thank you very much. Just hang tight for a couple minutes or so and we'll get started very shortly. Evelyn, this is Laura. I just emailed you someone that needs some help signing on, so could you please help them?
Yep, got it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Arsenault. Just give us 1 or 2 more minutes. We'll start shortly at 6:35 just to make sure we give ample time for everyone to get on and troubleshoot for WebEx. If you have any
Laura, I think
issues
you're
with...
muted.
You sure?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Nick. This is Laura Arsenault. If you're having trouble getting connected, please put a message in the chat function, or if you have any other people that need help connecting, please feel free to share this information. One of my assistants on the WebEx, could somebody put the phone number and link in to the chat so that if people need to call in or to send it to other people that are having trouble getting connected, can somebody please do that? Thank you, everyone. It's 6:35, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I will note that the meeting is being recorded, so if anyone misses anything at the meeting, we can go ahead and post it online after the recording is finished, and you can pass it on to other members of the community that are interested. So once again, I know I've mentioned a couple times, my name is Laura Arsenault. I'm basically the project manager of the Hollin Hills Historic Overlay District proposal with the county. And I want to go through a little bit of the agenda for the meeting, and then we'll go through a couple presentations. First, we're going to do a welcome. I've just done that, talk about our staff, have a little introduction from Supervisor Stork, and go through some of the features of WebEx if we do a little tutorial. And then we're going to give a staff presentation with the staff, a little bit of background, the staff findings and analysis that we've completed thus far. And then we're going to go through the schedule of the upcoming items that will be involved with this process. Then we will be looking forward to the, discussion of design guidelines with the consultant. And then we'll move into frequently asked questions. We have a couple that we think are going to be very popular, and then a Q&A session to wrap it up at 8:30. So with that, I want to pass it off to Supervisor Stork. If one of the staff could unmute him. I'm not sure if he's a panelist or an attendee, but Nick, I don't know if you have him with you.
Laura, I see Nick listed as an attendee. He must have, so I think he might need to be moved back. Oh, I see. Okay, as a panelist.
David, could you please promote Nick Reinhardt back to be a panelist?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Nick Reinhardt has now been promoted to a panelist.
Thank you, David.
Laura, can you?
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code.
Hello?
Hi, Supervisor Stork. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I had a hard time getting on, so I don't know why. But I'll talk to my staff tomorrow about it.
Supervisor Stork, I just did a very short introduction and was throwing the ball over to you for your comments.
Okay, are you ready then?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and can people hear me now then?
I can hear you. Can someone else please confirm?
Yes, I can hear you too. This is Leanna O'Donnell.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me part of this. And more importantly, thank you, Leanna and Laura and Nick and many others who have been involved with this process for leading it for now almost 2 years. It's been a long process because when we do things in the county and we want to make sure that we build consensus and support for things to get done right, it takes a long time. And to some degree that can be frustrating for folks, and to some degree for other folks it's going too fast. So we recognize there's a balance there, but the 2 years that we've spent, I think, have helped us to kind of define more clearly what a historic overlay district should look like and how it might fit and or not fit into what Hollin Hills and the community is looking for. So the virtual part of that is, I think, is part of what's made it hard for all of us as well. But for those of you who are just joining us now, this process has been going on for some time, and it was truly a community-initiated process. Community members, a vast number of community members came to me and asked that we engage with them to see what can be done to establish a historic overlay district that would be then tied into the National Register of Historic Places. Now, the results of the petition show the majority support among community members to move forward with this initiative. And therefore, I went to the board in July of 2018 to order county staff and the Department of Planning and Development to analyze the feasibility of a potential historic overlay district in Hollin Hills. As you know, many of you at least, a working group of Hollin Hills homeowners was formed to assist the county staff in this process in order to keep community concerns front and center as the staff went to do their work, as well as it provided a way of engaging staff as they went through different parts in a way of not only communicating more broadly to the community, but also making sure that the development of the process was consistent with what the community was seeking when they first came to me to initiate this process. The timeline for this has been revised a number of times. COVID has probably been the biggest single impact on all of us because our ability to have formal community meetings, in-person community meetings, has been frankly eliminated. And so we've tried to do this virtually, and we all know it's harder to get that right. So the goal of the meeting today is to present an overview of the project as a refresher, really as a presentation of the draft design principles and the findings from the traces, the EHT traceries that have been done, but also to get your feedback. So we're anticipating a public hearing before the Planning Commission in early September of 2021, that's this year, and a public hearing and a final vote by the Board of Supervisors also by September 2021. Again, I want to thank and truly applaud the efforts of Laura Arsenault, Lily Yugazu, Nicole Brannon, and other staff of the Department of Planning and Development for working so hard and diligently, and really through all the COVID challenges that this presented, to really work with the work groups to continue this hybrid model of virtually and some in person as we adjust to this new normal of COVID. And as we all know, COVID's not going anywhere, at least not for the next 6 months or so, maybe a year or so. So we know that we have to continue this process frankly, in spite of COVID, because we know we need to keep moving to see and engage the community on this one. I also want to thank, just as importantly, the two co-chairs of the Hollin Hills HOD work group. Lee Cutler and Barbara Ward have worked very, very hard to not only coordinate with the working group members, but also to communicate and coordinate with the community overall, and to truly to maintain a constructive dialogue for the past couple of years of this process. Again, thank you all very much for attending tonight and for your continued dedication to this initiative. I look forward to hearing the responses and comments from the broader Hollin Hills community, and absolutely positively, this process will not be done until the community either decides that it wants to move forward in some strong and substantial way, a consensus of sorts, or decide that they don't want to move forward in some strong or consensus way. Either way, I will be there to support the community and their efforts and their position, and as needed to bring those matters to the Board of Supervisors and for any final disposition. So again, thank you all very much for participating.
Thank you, Supervisor Stork, for those comments. We appreciate that opening and the support that we've seen from your office on this case. I'm going to go ahead and do some WebEx checks for everybody, just to make sure everyone can hear and see. I still am getting a couple emails from people having trouble connecting. So what I'm doing, I'm kind of fielding them out to our different staff on board. So please be patient with us. I want to share my screen. Let's see. Here. Okay. That's not the right one. Okay, so moving right along, want to introduce some staff. As Supervisor Stork mentioned, we have a large group working on this project. We have Lily Yegazu, who's a planner with the Zoning Administration Division, Nicole Brannon, who's a preservation planner. We have one of our Heritage Resources interns, Kara Davis, along with some support staff for tonight, including Evelyn Mitchell and David Stinson, and wanted to thank them both for their support. And the division director of the planning division is Leanna O'Donnell. So those are kind of the key players in this, as well as we have Nick Reinhardt and Christine Marin from Supervisor Stork's office, who have been helping us coordinate some of these efforts. So some quick housekeeping. I want to do a quick WebEx introduction test. If there's all the questions I will ask will be monitored and relayed by staff at the end of the presentation. So feel free, if you would like to type in questions to the Q&A function. It's on the right side of your screen. You can type your questions directly into there. And at the end of the presentation, staff will read them aloud. They'll also be part of our record. So I would encourage you and recommend to use that function. So if we do not get to your question tonight, we will be putting together kind of a comment response matrix at the end of this, kind of highlighting some answers to common themes that we receive. So other than that, if everyone could type in the chat function or the Q&A, if you could type in here or hello or something like that to make sure everyone can use that function. So if you would go ahead and please do that, I would appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. I'm going to do the raise your hand function next, so just hold up tight 1 second and I will do that. And I think we have about 100+ people online, so I appreciate everyone coming and engaging in this process. We do need your feedback and comments to make this a great project in the end. So the next kind of housekeeping thing I'd like to do, there's also, if you click on your name on the top right of the screen under participants, might be a little bit hard to find, but if you go to participants on the bottom of your screen, it should say participants. And if you highlight over your name, you can raise your hand. I think we have a lot of question marks and oh, I see a lot of hand raisings too. Thank you very much. And I would recommend if you have a question, we're not going to unmute the attendees until after the Q&A session, and then we will open up the floor for comments and questions. So please hold your questions to the end unless you're having trouble right now connecting, and we will work on that. Okay, all right, thank you very much for that. We'll go over that at the end too, right before the question and answer session. So we'll go right into the presentation. I'm not going to go over the location because you all are pretty familiar with where you live, but it is in the Mount Vernon Supervisory District near Fort Hunt Road and Sherwood Hall Lane. And as Supervisor Stork mentioned, on July 31st, 2018, there was an authorization which directed staff to consider the establishment of the Hollin Hills Historic Overlay District. And with that authorization, we were looking at a couple things. So we were looking at the potential of doing a rezoning to add the Historic Overlay District boundaries. We were looking at a zoning ordinance amendment, which was new language for the Historic Overlay District, a comprehensive plan amendment to recommend new text, and then also look at draft design guidelines for the Hollin Hills Historic Overlay District, which is a document that's used by the Architecture Review Board in review of their cases. The Hollin Hills significance, as many of you know, and I'm not claiming to be an expert by any means, but it is significant because of its modern architectural style developed by Charles Goodman and Robert Davenport. And it has a land design significance of how the houses are sited on the property and built into the landscape, in the natural landscape. It was listed on the National Register in 2013 and also was listed on the County Inventory of Historic Sites listing in September of 1972. Both of those designations are honorific designations and do not place any additional restrictions on the homeowner. So a couple of background questions is, what exactly is a Historic Overlay District and what is the Architectural Review Board? So the Historic Overlay District is a zoning tool that helps promote the general welfare through the identification, preservation, and enhancement of building structures and neighborhoods and landscapes in places and areas that have historical, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. So that's what we're reviewing the significance of Hollin Hills against. So does it meet this definition of Historic Overlay District? The Architectural Review Board is the group that oversees the regulations of the Historic Overlay District and reviews building permits and sign plans to ensure that new development or construction is appropriate within the district and relates and is appropriate for the historic significance. The ARB works with the homeowner on the design of the proposal to ensure it does not negatively impact the historic visual significance of the community. And the ARB reviews and approves or denies the design guidelines, not the Board of Supervisors. So that last item I mentioned at the beginning, the design guidelines are specifically used by the ARB to review if any if any proposals are in conformance with the Historic Overlay District. So what does a HOD designation mean for your property? So as I mentioned, the ARB approval would be required before a building permit or a site plan, and it applies primarily to larger exterior renovations, construction, or demolitions. So we're talking about decks, additions, installation of pools, modification of landscaping. In some other historic overlay districts, we've had septic fields. So anything that changes the landscape or land disturbance or changes the exterior of the building. It does not apply to interior alterations, and that existing renovations that are existing today can remain. And the underlying zoning, which is R2 for the majority of the properties, which is residential 2 dwelling units per acre, would remain in place. The use is not changing. So since the last community meeting we had was about 2 years ago now, which is kind of hard to believe, we've met with the work group a number of times. I think 11 or 12 to be exact. But we worked with members of the work group who volunteered at the last meeting and were selected by Supervisor Stork and his staff. And then the work group reviewed defining features of the neighborhood with staff. as well as discussing contributing and non-contributing features of the properties, and also reviewed the design guidelines. So the work group, which is consists of about 15 members, I believe, is made up of a couple architectural review board members, a representative from the History Commission, and some community members as well. With the work group, staff completed the analysis by doing site visits, researching potential historic overlay district boundaries. There was some discussion about which properties to include and to not include. And then we took a look at each individual property in the district and determined whether or not it was contributing or non-contributing, and talked with the work group about that. And I'll go into in just a minute about what contributing and non-contributing means, because I know that was a question that came from a large group of, a large number of people before the meeting. So the staff analysis and findings are exactly what the Board of Supervisors motion authorized in 2018. That's exactly what we're presenting to you tonight. So we're presenting the historic overlay district boundaries, the contributing, non-contributing properties, the comprehensive plan draft text, and the zoning ordinance amendment draft text. So contributing versus non-contributing determinations were based on the architectural site and features. So staff, when we started this, we looked at we started with the National Register nomination that was completed in 2013, which gave us a wealth of information on the background, the setup, and the architectural significance of the community. So we took that, and then we looked at what was in the community now and came up with our own contributing features to the district. What makes Hollin Hills unique, and what architecture contributes to making a house a Hollin Hills house? So we came up with this list on the screen here. We talked about chimneys, masonry end walls, large wall expanses of glass windows, roof designs, preservation of the natural landscape, and the preservation of topography. And then it had architectural characteristics of the modern movement, such as clean lines, very little adornment, elaboration, things like that. So that's what our review list was of whether or not we felt a building was contributing versus non-contributing. So if the house had those features, we determined initially that it was contributing. So the next step in that process was looking further into it. So the National Register nomination was completed in 2013. So we started with that. Is the building contributing or non-contributing? We did agree that the buildings that were non-contributing would remain non-contributing. So we did agree with that. However, we did find a number that, in addition, that were non-contributing, and I'll get to those numbers in a minute. So after we determined if it met this, we went through this process of questioning on whether or not it changed based on any of these questions listed below. So was the property contributing in the National Register nomination? Has the property been modified since the National Register nomination? So it was modified since 2013. Did the modifications make it non-contributing? Another question we asked was the modification completed in the period of significance between 1949 and 1971, which is when the first house in Hollin Hills was constructed and the last house in Hollin Hills was constructed. So if the house was modified with an addition, changes of landscaping, driveways, fencing, things like that, does it still retain the defining characteristics I just mentioned? And we use building permits, site visits, and aerial photos to determine if those changes were substantial enough to change it from contributing to non-contributing. And then lastly, we use something called the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. And what that is, it's an industry best practice of if a building is modified, does it still retain the historic integrity according to these standards? The Secretary of Interior Standards were developed by the National Park Service in coordination with the review of National Register of Historic Places applications. So in addition, we asked these questions. Was it new use? Most of the time, no, they remained residential dwellings. Was there removal of historic materials that diminished it enough? For example, was the chimney covered over or changed to a different topic? Does the addition or modification create a false sense of historic development? For example, were windows that are just like the existing windows changed and put in, and you can't tell the difference between the new and old windows. The new additions were historic in their own right. That goes back to the question of were they developed in the period of significance? Were there distinctive features that were eroded? Once again, covering up the chimney, adding another layer, removing the butterfly roof. Those are just some examples. replacement of historic materials. And then this one, which was discussion through the work group of the new additions must be differentiated from the old. So and we'll get into that a little bit more with the design guidelines later on. But this doesn't mean it has to be drastically different, because once again, we want the additions to be complementary to the existing dwellings and not detract from them. And then the last one was if new additions could be removed without negatively impacting the historic nature of a house. For example, there are a number of carports that were put on, and those carports could be removed very easily without damaging the historic nature and integrity of the building. So now we'll get to kind of the beginning of our findings. As you can see on this map, which is very similar to one that was sent out to you, is the staff proposed historic overlay district boundaries. There are 492 parcels total and a number of uses and ownership. The majority of them were zoned residential dwelling 2 units per acre. Private properties, some are owned by the Hollic Hills Civic Association. I'm sorry, I have that backward. It should be Civic Association of Hollin Hills. Some of those were R1 properties and just outlying lots. Some are Park Authority owned property, and some are Board of Supervisors owned property. As you can see on this map to the right, and hopefully you can see my cursor, some of these properties in pink are the non-contributing properties, and the properties in green are the contributing properties. So as I mentioned earlier, there were 13 from the National Register nomination that were determined non-contributing, and staff determined that there were an additional 25 that were non-contributing currently. However, a number of those were the Park Authority owned properties. So you have White Oaks Park to the north, you have I think it's Paul Stream Valley Park, I'm sorry, to the right along Fort Hunt Road there. And then you have Hollin Meadows Park there just north of Hollin Meadows Elementary School. So some of them are park-owned properties, but there were an additional, I think about 16 determinations from staff that additional properties had significant changes since 2013. So going through some of the administrative part of this is the comprehensive plan amendment. So the comprehensive plan is a tool for decision-making process regarding the natural and built environment of Fairfax County. So what we have to do with this is we have to propose language for the Board of Supervisors to adopt if they decide to approve the historic overlay district. So we have to have language ready to go. In the current language, it mentions listings on the inventory of historic sites and the National Register of Historic Places, and encourages preservation of the Hollin Hills community. The proposed language is very editorial. There's no changes to the planned land use. There's no changes to the density. And it will just update the inventory listing to denote the historic overlay district designation, and will add the boundary of the historic overlay district to the comprehensive plan map. So it is very editorial in nature, just basically updating that to make sure it's in conformance. The zoning ordinance amendment is largely editorial as well. We will be creating a new historic overlay district zoning ordinance language, and the zoning ordinance provides regulations for zoning in Fairfax County. So the existing historic overlay districts, which is kind of what we're basing this one on, the proposed regulations defer to the underlying R1 and R2 zoning. So that means the existing residential dwellings, anything that you could do today, you could continue to do with the R1 and R2 zoning. So with the with the zoning ordinance amendment, we added the purpose of the district, and we discussed additional standards to put in. With the work group, we discussed some additional findings that you can see in some of the text that was uploaded earlier, but discussions that included things such as height restrictions, a discussion on fences, which we ultimately deferred to the Architectural Review Board, and then additional discussions on district defining features, but a lot of them were not included because they are regulated by the existing zoning that matches on the property. So the only additional requirement that the zoning ordinance would require with the addition of the historic overlay district is the review by the Architectural Review Board for building permits and site plans. So on that note, kind of looking at what the zoning ordinance regulations mean versus the design guidelines, which we'll be moving towards very shortly. So with your building permit today, without the historic overlay district, building permits are required for additions, demolitions of properties, pools, and disturbance of area more than 2,500 square feet. So with the zoning ordinance regulations, things that are required today without the historic overlay district are setbacks. So that's the distance from your house to the front property line. And there's also setbacks to the side and rear property lines. The siting of the building on a lot, where it can go, how much can be added onto it. And the fences, the height and location of fences are also regulated with today's zoning ordinance regulations. The design guidelines, which our consultants at Traceries will be presenting very shortly, are recommendations to keep the integrity of the historic district, so mainly architectural, landscape, that sort of thing. Those include the defining characteristics that I mentioned before, including the architectural chimneys, the roof shape, windows, the street view additions, and some facade additions, depending on whether or not they have a historic integrity, maintaining the topography of the land, and the design and style of fences. So for example, the fence and height is regulated, the fence height is regulated by the zoning ordinance, so you can only put it in certain places. But the design, if example, they wanted, the Architectural Review Board preferred a white picket fence, that would go under the design guideline recommendations. Some things not regulated, just to reiterate, interior modifications, deeds and covenants are not regulated by the HOD designation, and the DRC guidelines, as well as property values. And with that, I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to our consultants at EHT Traceries, and Sarah Vonish is going to be presented. So David, I don't know if you can pass her the presenter mode. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hi, Laura, and if you could also add Laura Hughes to the presenter list as well.
David, can you add Laura Hughes when you get a second?
Certainly.
Thank you. So I will share my screen. It looks like the share content is grayed out for me.
Hold on, Sarah, let me make you host. I'm sorry,
Thank you.
make you presenter. There we go.
Thank you.
Try now.
Laura, who else we made a attendee? Or, I'm sorry, a panelist?
Laura Hughes. Sarah, I don't see Laura on the attendee list.
Okay. Well, I will just get started then. I'm Sarah Vonish. I'm a historic preservation specialist with EHT Traceries. I've been working with Laura Hughes, who hopefully will be able to join us shortly, and Catherine Wallace, also from Traceries, on the design guidelines. So the contents of our presentation, the purpose of the design guidelines, what they can and cannot do, which Laura A has already kind of covered, but we'll go through that again. An overview of the contents of the design guidelines, how you as a homeowner will use the design guidelines, and just a quick comparison of the HOD design guidelines draft and the DRC design guidelines. So the purpose of the design guidelines is to provide a historical background and practical guidance to project applicants, property owners, building industry members, like architects, designers, landscape architects, and the general community to facilitate ARB consideration of project applications. They offer recommendations for design and treatment strategies that maintain, strengthen, and enhance the historic and architectural character of the district. They're recommendations and not requirements. And again, as Laura mentioned earlier, they are approved by the ARB and not the Board of Supervisors. So our methodology for preparing the document, we reviewed existing documentation, including the National Register nomination, which Traceries helped prepare back in 2013. We surveyed the neighborhood and took pictures of all the houses to inform the design guidelines and to provide good examples for users of the document. We had a lot of consultation with DPD staff and worked with the Hollin Hills work group, presenting the guidelines and making revisions as necessary to respond to their comments. And we also coordinated this effort with our ongoing work to update the other design guidelines for the existing 13 historic overlay districts, as well as creating an overarching design guidelines document for all the HODs within the county. So as a result of the design guideline updates, eventually there will be an overall HOD design guidelines document, and that will complement and be paired with the individual HOD design guidelines, including Hollin Hills, if it goes forward. So what guidelines can and cannot do? So the guidelines do aid citizens, users, property owners to better understand the ARB's review process and to meet ARB's review standards, which are the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. They provide objective criteria that the ARB can use to better protect and preserve Hollin Hills, provide a better understanding of the HOD's physical and historic character, including outlining the character-defining features found on the buildings and within the landscape, assist in the evolution of the HOD in a sensitive manner that meets contemporary needs while retaining the defining characteristic features, and outlines a degree of adaptability that's appropriate within the HOD and well aligned with preservation standards, namely the standards for rehabilitation. So they do not require that buildings remain as they originally remained or require that an owner restore a building to its original condition. They also do not resolve all design challenges that might come up in an HOD, especially in a HOD like Hollin Hills, where buildings are so site-specific. They don't give case-specific advice or address exceptions or unusual conditions, or give absolute direction as to a solution to a design problem. They don't regulate interior design, new construction, or rehabilitation activities. Again, they're just recommendations. They also don't improve the maintenance of existing buildings. And again, they don't become an amendment to the zoning ordinance. They are instead approved by the ARB and recommendations for treatments within the HOD. So what's in the design guidelines? Everyone should have been able to access the current draft of the design guidelines. So I'm not going to go into great detail on the contents, but here's a summary of the contents. It includes an introduction, history and significance of the neighborhood, an overview of the potential HOD, including the boundaries, contributing and non-contributing resources that Laura outlined already, and then a detailed discussion of the character-defining features, including a lot of images to show users what those features are and how to identify them on their individual houses. It then goes into the district-specific design guidelines, which I'll go through in a little more detail momentarily. And then an appendix that includes a glossary of terms, a general maintenance checklist that a homeowner could use if they wanted to or needed to, just with recommendations for how often to inspect house features and the best course of action for maintaining them. Some additional resources for reference, and then a list of the non-contributing and contributing resources. So within Chapter 4, the design guidelines, the document presents the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which is the basis for the design guidelines. They include recommended and not recommended actions within each section. And the sections include the preservation and rehabilitation of existing buildings. This section addresses general maintenance issues and strategies for preserving existing buildings. It acknowledges that the construction techniques and materials used in Hollin Hills were often mass-produced and selected for their affordability, and as a result, may require more replacement or different treatments than you would see on other historic neighborhoods. It also outlines a treatment hierarchy, which begins with the most minimally invasive actions, such as repair, and then progresses to more invasive actions, such as replacement. So the next section is new construction and new additions. That covers guidelines related to the design and construction of new buildings and new additions within the HOD. These design guidelines are intended to help project applicants design compatible new construction and additions that complement the existing neighborhood character in a way so that the buildings will continue to be contributing to the neighborhood. On the right-hand side, you can see some images from the design guidelines, just as an example of a recommended. The first two images are windows recommended versus not recommended. And the second is kind of the citing of additions and making sure they're differentiated in massing and materiality. So those guidelines are within the document, and we look forward to discussing with you as part of the Q&A. The final section within the design guidelines provide guidance for landscape, streetscape, and archaeology. As we know, the landscape is such an integral part of the historic nature of Hollin Hills. So those guidelines provide recommendations for maintaining and continuing that historic character. So how the homeowner uses the design guidelines. First, they're a great source for history and understanding the significance of the community. It provides photographs and additional information on the character-defining features that should be maintained and preserved as part of any future project. They provide some guidance and overview on how to plan a project and the steps that are needed, the applications, and when a permit is required. The homeowner should reference recommended and not recommended guidelines and treatment recommendations when planning a project in an HOD. Share with your architect or contractor for examples, and then review the maintenance checklist within the appendix for ongoing maintenance issues with your houses. So we received a number of comments and questions about the differences between the DRC guidelines and the county or the proposed draft HOD design guidelines. We reviewed and compared the documents, and they're largely complementary. They address a lot of the same topics, including siting, grading, orientation of new buildings, fences and screen walls, driveways, walkways. So it's consistent between the two. The primary difference is the use of conform, which the DRC design guidelines uses, versus compatibility, which the HOD design guidelines really stresses. So, again, they're just recommendations, not requirements. So encouraging compatibility as part of the HOD design guidelines based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation is the major difference. So that's all I have. Laura, I'll turn it back to you for the Q&A.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for that presentation over the design guidelines. We've been working very closely with Sarah and the work group to try to hone in on the issues that we have with those. And as Sarah mentioned, we will continue to work on those, and those will be ultimately approved by the Architectural Review Board, but a draft will be submitted to the Board of Supervisors for consideration with the approval or denial of the Historic Overlay District. So let me go back and share, change back, let me see. I'm gonna make David the host again, and I'm gonna go back to, if everyone could, if you could lower your hands and clear your questions as we get to the question and answer session so that we know who's up next and who has some new comments. Hold on one second. Let's see. Okay, I'm taking presenter back. Okay, I'm gonna go back to David. Can you move me to the presenter? I can't seem to take it back.
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, so next, moving on, we're going to go into some frequently asked questions that came in. Next, we're going into the schedule, a timeline and schedule review, so you can see the kind of next steps in our process. Tonight, we're here at the January 25th, second community meeting. We would ask if you have any comments related to the meeting tonight or any of the documents submitted online. We would ask that you submit them by February 28th. Additional input opportunities will be available, but at some point in March of 2021, we're going to be getting back together with the work group, discussing all the comments that we've received tonight and moving forward. In March and April, we'll be doing additional staff and review, internal review as well. And then in June 2021, if we're still moving forward on this project, we'll be publishing the staff report. In July of 2021, with the date to be determined, kind of the second administrative piece, the authorization moves forward of the board's own motion for the Historic Overlay District, as well as the zoning ordinance amendment authorization. Those two were not completed in July of 2018, so they will be going forward as an administrative piece, and there will be opportunity for public comment written in at that point. In summer of 2021, staff here will be working with the supervisor's office to do a community survey. You will have the staff report available for your review, as well as all the information online from the public meetings. And that survey will be going out. We do not know what form or method it will be happening, but we do know we will be doing one. So stay tuned for that information, and more information will be sent out on that. And then in September of October 2021, we're aiming for the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors public hearings. Those dates are still to be determined, but we're hoping to do it after the August recess and looking forward to those dates. And then after, if the Board of Supervisors approves the Historic Overlay District, we would be moving to the Architectural Review Board and looking for their review and action on the draft design guidelines. So that would be in November of 2021, and that would be the end of this process, of setting up this process, not of the A or B review. So, and this PowerPoint will be available online after the meeting tonight, hopefully sometime tomorrow. So if you need any of these dates, please feel free to look at that or email myself or Nicole Brannon. There's some frequently asked questions that came in. I just wanted to point out again tonight and reiterate, because I know there were a lot of questions on this, was I call it the pink and green question, but the contributing versus non-contributing designation. So and for short, the contributing properties have features that relate to the historic significance of the district. So that means that it has architectural styles or elements that relate to the original design of the structure or are evocative of that. And then a non-contributing building has features that would detract from the significance of the district. And that's not a negative thing, and it doesn't mean it doesn't have any contributing features, but staff felt that it did not meet those characteristics we talked about earlier, the chimneys, the windows, the height, the roof, etc. So once again, how would the HOD designation impact the property? The building permit and site plan review would be by the Architectural Review Board, and it's another step in your building permit or site plan review process. There was a question of what that process looks like, and basically you would submit your normal drawings that you would submit to the county for the building permit or the site plan, and the ARB would review those documents with a couple extra things, including an application form and some photos of the existing property. And then they would make some comments on the application and give you some recommendations. And additional community input opportunities. So we're here with you tonight. We will be continuing to work and collaborate with the work group. There will be letters you can send anytime to our staff or the supervisor's office. And then the community survey we're looking forward to in 2021. And also there will be public comment at the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors hearings. So there will be continued input from the community throughout this whole process. So please do not feel like tonight is your last chance to talk to us. We will be available until this is done, whenever that may be. So with that, I am going to open it up to the Q&A. However, I am going to defer to the work group first to make a couple of comments. And so I'm going to go through and unmute some of our work group members. One of the first people I wanted to have a chance to speak was one of our co-chairs for the work group, Barbara Ward. So David, if you could go through and unmute her. Once again, you can use the chat function to answer questions. You can type directly into the question and answers. And what we're going to do is kind of alternate between the raise your hand function and the Q&A. But once again, I will recommend to put the question in the Q&A in case we don't get to it tonight. It is 7:25 right now. The meeting is scheduled to end at 8:30. So we do have about an hour to answer questions if need be. So with that, Barbara, I'm having trouble because I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if you are promoted or unmuted or if you're able to speak.
Barbara,
I'll try. Can I be heard?
Yes, Barbara, I can hear you.
Okay. There have been a number of, just so people will know, there have been a number of people in community that have worked as part of the working group. We are not fully satisfied with the guidelines. We think that they meet a lot of needs, but there are still some issues that need to be resolved. One of the issues that I have is that the covenants which govern every home in Hollin Hills require that new additions or renovations to the building be in harmony and conformity with what exists. The guidelines cannot erase the conformity requirement because then we're in violation of the covenant. So that's an issue that has to be resolved still. And I think we've had some productive discussions with the county people. More is necessary. We also need to work out how the design review committee will function. And that's something that we'll work out over the next couple of months. If anybody has any questions, wants to express some concerns, please feel free to get in touch with me or any other member of the working community whose names I will post on the forum. That's all.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate your words, and we are definitely working happy to work with the work group, and they're kind of our first step to working with the community. I will ask if you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself. I think most people are muted, but I know with Barbara we had a little bit of an echo. I know we could still hear, but please, if you could do that, that would be great. So with that, David, if you could mute a couple more members of the work group for me, or if you're a member of the work group and have a question or would like to say something, let me know. I just wanted to give everyone in the work group an opportunity to speak, and because they are a little bit more familiar with the project overall. So with that, let's just give it a minute or two, and we'll get some members of the work group. Hold on.
Laura, who should I unmute next?
I would go ahead and I'm trying to look and see if anybody has their hand raised or a question in the chat. Let's see.
Yes, Laura, there are some hands raised.
Okay. Here, do you know if any of them are in the work group?
They do not appear to be in the work group.
Okay. So I know a couple people might have some comments. I know Lee, I'm not sure if Lee Cutler, I don't know if he wanted to speak. Let's see. Okay, well, we can give them, so David, if you would unmute Lee Cutler, I think it's, and then also I know Millie Stanges would like to speak as well. And then if there's any other, those two are in the work group, and then we can go on. I see Bob Kinzer's here, some other people, but Kay, if anyone has any comments, we can work on that too. So if you could unmute Lee Cutler and Millie Stanges, David.
Is that a Lee Cutler?
Yes.
I don't see a Lee Cutler. Does anyone else see that on the?
Oh, it's
She's
Velma,
under Velma. I mean,
yeah, Velma Lee Cutler.
Okay. Velma Lee Cutler is unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to address a few points, and I won't be very long, particularly personal business aspects of the HOD, Hollin Hills HOD. I strongly encourage homeowners to contact your mortgage holders, your planning and regard to how the private but integrated contracts, these private but integrated contracts between you and the providers may be affected by the HOD zoning change. HOD zoning implies higher risk for these companies, which means higher costs for you and can put your existing home equity at risk. So it's in everyone's interest to at least contact your providers and discuss it with them. That's all.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate your comments. I think the next one we had, David, was Millie Stanges.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Millie, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Laura, and good evening, everyone. My name is Millie Crawford Stanges. I live on Stafford Road, and I'm a member of the working group. The group's first meeting was a year ago this month. Over the intervening year, the group completed two major tasks. We identified defining features of a typical Hollin Hills home, and then we selected contributing and non-contributing houses for potential HOD. The working group was hardworking and exchanged many well-reasoned viewpoints. Throughout the process, there was a disagreement among the group on several significant points of issue. Many of those issues remain unresolved. I have reservations and concerns about the need or purpose for an HOD. The HOD initiative is not simply about historic preservation. The proposed HOD is a land tenure and resources issue that deeply affects every individual homeowner's bundle of private property rights. Imposing an HOD on Hollin Hills homeowners would adversely affect individual property rights and bring consequences more serious than simply a few building design restrictions. I also take issue with the county review process for the proposed HOD. County formula for selecting an HOD is flawed and problematic. Hollin Hills does not fit the county's boilerplate, which is specifically focused on truly historic properties. No HOD feasibility study was done, and the county process of selecting contributing houses was pursued under the presumption of HOD approval. Most current Fairfax County HOD designate structures that are over 250 years old and meet multiple historical criteria. This HOD proposal is unique and atypical within Fairfax County and Virginia. There is no precedent or existing HOD in Fairfax County or Virginia of similar complexity, design, and scope. This HOD proposal represents a test case for Fairfax County and Virginia HOD programs. The county process moved forward without full and fair consideration of whether or why an HOD might be appropriate as a community-wide designation. By imposing an HOD on Hollin Hills, homeowners would forfeit their right to make home and landscape design changes in accordance with the long-standing principle of making the highest and best use of one's property. Instead, the County Architectural Review Board and staff will thereafter advise and in many cases decide what, when, how, and where you may change the look, feel, and appeal of your property. Hollin Hills is not a homeowners association community, but will become a de facto county-controlled HOA. This is a serious, far-reaching, and potentially damaging proposition. Hollin Hills should not seek or welcome the notoriety of an all-inclusive county-mandated HOD. In fact, the whole Hollin Hills community of landowning, tax-paying homeowners did not request this initiative. Only one entity, a civic association that pays no real estate taxes to Fairfax County, conducted a lobbying effort by petition to solicit support from a contingent of residents. The HOD proposal is not a civic issue, and it is not a collective issue. The HOD proposal is an intrusive and burdensome proposition. An HOD raises significant issues about one's severable and inalienable land tenure rights and the ability to make the highest and best use of one's property. The HOD proposal is a rightful matter of personal choice and self-determination. There are roughly 460 residential properties included in the HOD zoning map, and each property owner is an equal stakeholder. That amounts to 460 stakeholders significantly affected by the HOD proposal. I believe each stakeholder has the right to freedom of choice and self-determination. A simple canvass and request for information from the 460 stakeholders would inform the county of those homeowners who choose to opt out from inclusion in an HOD. The HOD proposal is now a Fairfax County political initiative, and the county is responsible for the review process and outcome. Fairfax County has failed to conduct a thorough and detailed Hollin Hills HOD concept review and feasibility study, including cost, benefit, and legal analysis for public review and consent. Fairfax County was remiss for not initiating the HOD review process with personal outreach to each Hollin Hills residential homeowner. The county should rescind this HOD proposal if it cannot obtain the unanimous consent of each and every Hollin Hills residential homeowner. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Millie, for your comments and questions. Is there anyone else? I didn't see anyone else from the work group that wanted to speak, so I'd like to go into the questions that we have. So Evelyn, if you would go first and read aloud one of the questions that we have either from the chat. I see a lot coming in, and that's perfectly fine. I will do my best to get them all, but I will say too that if there's ones that are kind of reiterating, we're going to kind of skip over them, but we will try to respond to everyone in our comment matrix. So Evelyn, if you want to pick a question to go first, please.
Okay, there's a question/comment from Dennis and Martha Brown. It says, is this a tempest in a teapot? Since the 1950s, 28 homes were deemed non-contributing, which is 10% of the total number of homes here, question mark. I see no urgency to create a new bureaucracy. The existing DRC has done its job. Do you want me to go ahead and read the second one or just stop at that one?
Stop at that one for right now, because I think the
Okay.
next question is another issue. Thank you for your comments. I will say that I don't disagree with you. There is a reason why some of Hollin Hills, a majority of Hollin Hills, has retained its defining features. We were asked by the community, as Supervisor Stork mentioned at the beginning, it was a community process and to start and to request this historic overlay district. So that is what we have done, and that's what we are reviewing now. I understand that 38 out of 400 and some odd doesn't count for a lot for non-contributing. However, that's the task that we've looked at, and that's the findings that we have come up with. So it was a community effort to start this process, and we are moving forward with that. So Evelyn, if you want to go one more question, and then we'll go to the hand raisers.
Okay, the next question is also from Dennis and Martha Brown. Goodman was a futurist and used new ideas and methods to create the neighborhood as it sits. Would an innovator truly like the idea of prohibiting new innovation like solar rooftops or low reflective glass?
That's a great question. So the point of the historic overlay district designation is to not freeze Hollin Hills in today or 50 years ago. We do, the design guidelines do make recommendations of, for example, keeping the roof in similar slope materials, etc. However, in other historic overlay districts in the county, the Architectural Review Board has approved solar panel additions. And it really comes down to, I think, part of the mitigation regarded what they looked like, how obtrusive they were they visible from other historic structures, and then also kind of how they were set up. I think some of the electrical wiring that went to the solar panels, they asked them to paint the cabling wires a certain color so they wouldn't be as obtrusive, but the application was ultimately approved. So just because they're recommending to keep existing materials doesn't mean that they are not open to discussions and collaboration with the homeowner on these projects moving forward. All right, Kira, if you would pick someone, and then I think David's going to have to unmute them unless, Kira, you can unmute them.
I do not believe I'm able to unmute them, but we have Donna Luti, I believe, with her hand raised.
David, could you please unmute, I think it's Dana Lutit.
I apologize for any mispronunciations on my part as well.
Dana
you hear
is
me?
unmuted.
You can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
It's Dana Ludit.
Ludit, thank you.
Sure. I had three questions. The first was I was confused because I thought Sarah said that the design guidelines do not regulate new construction, and then she said that they do. So do they or don't they? The second one is, what is the benefit to homeowners of being in an HOD? And the third is, who will determine how the community survey is designed and completed? The Board of Supervisors or the community?
I beg your pardon, but it's late. If you could repeat your first question, and I'll be
Yeah,
happy
the
to answer
first
them
one
one
is,
at a time.
are the design guidelines regulating new construction or not?
The answer is no. Design guidelines are not regulatory. They are recommendations only.
So that the focus is on the word regulate, not on the fact that it's new construction.
Correct. It's
Okay.
I just want to clarify. It's recommendations of I would say preferred methods of how to do things.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that it can't be modified,
Sure.
altered, or negotiated.
Sure, but it doesn't mean that they are exempted somehow.
Correct.
That was the impression I got, that new construction's exempted, and so you can just build a McMansion.
No, new construction.
Okay.
So new construction in the terms of design guidelines, and I apologize, but it's also additions not just new construction of a dwelling, but new constructions, additions, any new modifications.
Sure.
That's all encumbered under
Sure.
new construction. Yes.
Sure. And then the second one was, what's the benefit? How do you sell this as a positive thing to people who are skeptical?
So yeah, I think you saw some bullets on the handout that was mailed to you about, the preservation of community. There's a visual view shed protection from neighbors to and from. It gives a little bit more oversight. Hollin Hills is unique in that it has the design review committee, and that's not true in the other historic overlay districts, but it does provide an extra level of review that's unbiased. And you also get the benefit of having historic preservation professionals on the architectural review board give you comments moving forward. I will say on the 3 or 4 years I've been with the architectural review board, there's never been a denial of an application. There's been lots of discussion, but on the architectural review board, the architectural review board is made up of preservation professionals that are appointed by different board of supervisors members. And those professionals include, I think we have 5 architects, we have a landscape architect, and so an archaeologist, a historian, a lawyer, all different sorts of groups that you'd be able to consult and use as reference. But the goal would be to find, we do not want to restrict what you're doing with your property. If you'd like a pool, we'd love to give you a pool. We just like to do it in a manner that would retain the integrity of the historic district. The problem with Hollin Hills is very unique and it's well preserved, but it could be starting to be eroded by new construction, things like that. The subdivisions are just turning 70 years old, if you're familiar with the post-World War II boom. And so they're very fringe history right now, and they're definitely threatened. So that's what we're looking at with the historic overlay district.
So I totally agree with you. And the last question was, who's going to determine how the community is surveyed? Because I know there are people who are concerned about that. And, is it going to be the Board of Supervisors or you people, or is it going to be the community who decides, how the community is surveyed and what represents the will of the community?
The survey this summer, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of details about the survey, but I will tell you it will be conducted by the county. There's still to be determined about, we might possibly work with our Office of Public Affairs. We will most likely do a mailing and an electronic survey as well. We have tools to do that. I just don't have much more information for you because we haven't figured it out yet. But I will I will say that every homeowner will be contacted, and we will do as much outreach as we can to get a comprehensive view from the community for the support or opposition for the historic overlay district.
Okay, so I really appreciate your answers. I can just say that, as someone who's fundamentally in support of an HOD, I certainly would be interested in knowing why someone like Millie Stanges is saying that we're putting our equity at risk and should be contacting our mortgage providers. So, I don't understand where that's coming from. And so I would ask you to explain it to us.
Well, there is a perception of exclusivity that comes with historic overlay districts. And I wouldn't say that it's cheap sometimes to do historic renovations to properties. But I will say with the Architectural Review Board, they work with you on things and issues such as cost. As professionals in the field, they'll be able to mitigate it. We had a case recently in the Centerville Historic Overlay District in which the applicant asked to replace some decking material that was wood, and they were using it as a childcare, so it didn't make much sense for us to have it as wood because it would be trampled on. So the ARB came up with using Trex, which is a material that is much more hardy than wood. So it's just about education of the process and materials and negotiation with the ARB, who are professionals in their field, to work on the best end result.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your time and your questions. All right, Evelyn, if we could go through another question. If you see one that's let's say a new one, or new topic, if you would.
Okay. The next question is from Robin Roberts. Can an explanation be provided on the process of a typical addition project between the DRC and the ARB through to permit issuance? And is there any collaboration or dialogue between the DRC and the ARB?
I can't comment on the DRC. The DRC is a separate process from the ARB review and not overseen by the county. I can go through what the ARB procedure and process is. I put up a slide talking about that, but it is still to be determined, and it's really incumbent upon the DRC to determine how they'll be working with the Architectural Review Board, because they operate independently, and so I really just cannot comment on the DRC. I would reach out to Barbara Ward, the DRC president, for more comments on that if you have specific questions on that. So the ARB procedure is you would apply for your building permit as you normally would with the county, and then you would consult with our staff, myself, Nicole Brannon, any other staff on board with us, to see if you need an administrative review or a full Architectural Review Board review. There are some instances where the staff can approve building permits administratively, and you would not need to go to the ARB for that. You would submit your ARB application submission, which is your building plans, your photos, any other additional information you'd have, including your application form. And then you would present in front of the Architectural Review Board, as I mentioned, with 11 preservation professionals, and then for a recommendation or decision. And then once that's determined, you would reach out to Heritage Resource staff for conformance check with the building permit group, and then it would be approved through the normal building process. Usually the hang up with the Architectural Review Board is the delay in time. The ARB only meets once a month. Currently, that could change at any time if we need it to, but the ARB only meets once a month and has time restrictions for submissions. For example, if you want something to be approved, you have to submit it 2 weeks before the ARB hearing. So if we miss that deadline, sometimes that pushes you to the next month, which I understand causes frustration when you're trying to put a deck on or get a building permit deck. But usually if we get notified earlier rather than later in the process, it really is a concurrent process with the county building permit process. So. Okay, Evelyn, if you want to give me one more.
Supervisor Stork said that he would be looking for a consensus to move forward. What level of feedback will be needed from the community? In other words, will there need to be responses from a certain percentage of the community in order to move forward?
Supervisor Stork or Nick, if you're still on, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit more. Unmute them again or promote them again. Let's see. David, could you unmute? I don't know if Supervisor Stork is still on, but maybe Nick or Nick Reinhardt or Christine. I just can't comment on that.
Nick Reinhardt is present. Should I unmute him?
Yes, please.
Nick, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry that for some reason my computer audio is not letting me hear you guys, but I'll just go ahead and speak. So I'm Nick Reinhardt. I am the land use aide for Supervisor Stork's office, and I've been primary person from our office working with Laura and staff and the work group on this project. We are still kind of, we don't have a set percentage at the moment, but Supervisor Stork is looking for, and I'm sorry to be vague, but he is looking for a majority consensus. The exact percentage, it's a bit early in the process. He feels to kind of put a number on it, but we will be, sharing that information as we move forward. and as we have more conversations with staff about what the community survey will look like.
Great, Nick. Thank you very much. I know it's very frustrating to hear a lot of question marks, but we just haven't developed it at this point. So we will be doing it. We will be doing outreach for it and trying our best to reach as many people as we can with this. Evelyn, did you want to give me another question for you, and then I'll go to Kira, because I know some people have their hand raised. Evelyn, are you there?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Next question is, I'm confused by the requirements for the windows, especially iron metal ones. The original metal windows are drafty and draw moisture into the house. Why did you recommend replacing them with iron or ironclad ones versus other materials that retain such look and make the house look better?
I'm going to defer to Sarah Vonish if she's available on that question, because it relates specifically to the design guidelines.
Sure. So the design guidelines, the first action they recommend is repair and replacement of windows in kind, recognizing that there are a lot of new materials and window types. The guidelines actually recommend replacement with a window that matches the historic appearance in the color, profile of the window. It doesn't require or necessitate, I guess, replacement with the same material. So if you have currently have metal windows and want to replace them with aluminum clad windows that may provide better protection from the elements in the outside and more durable, that's something that would be reviewed by the ARB, but it's something that's allowable and recommended within the design guidelines, so long as it matches the original historic appearance of the original windows. I hope that answers the question. And that's true for all material questions within the HOD. First course of action, repairing materials, replacing in kind, and where replacement in kind is not feasible or possible, to replace them with a like material that matches the historic appearance generally.
Great, thank you, Sarah. All right, Kira, if you would, or David or Kira, if you could give me another person who's raising their hand.
Alec Bennett has his hand raised.
Thank you for organizing this presentation and allowing comments and questions. Could you talk a little bit about existing historic overlay districts and whether residents there seem to be kind of satisfied with the way they work, or do you get a lot of complaints that they're too restrictive?
So that's a great question. So there are 13 historic overlay districts in the county existing, as well as the Laurel Hill area, which is the former DC Penitentiary Workhouse and Reformatory that operates as a historic overlay district as well. I will say, to be honest, we don't usually get a large amount of comments about the negative parts of it. When people buy into that area, they know hopefully they know they're getting involved with the historic overlay district. It is on all our tax records and county maps. The biggest complaint I usually hear is the length of time between the architectural review board meetings. Like I said, a common occurrence that happens is somebody comes in the day after the architectural review board meeting happened, or a week before it's due and they want to build the deck on the back of their house for their next weekend's party, and it doesn't happen. You know, we can't turn around the review that quickly. I honestly don't hear a lot of negativity about it. Maybe they don't talk to me about it, but as far as I know, there are residences in other historic overlay districts, and they usually support the process because they get some professional historic preservation expertise, as well as being able to contribute to their community and surroundings. So as far as I know, it's positive, but yeah, as far as I know. Thank you for, did you have another question or was it just that one, Mr. Bennett?
I did have one other question. You know, there's been a little bit of talk on the call about, you know, checking with your insurance provider. And I would just be interested if, you know, anyone had any, you know, articles or evidence that your insurance premiums would go up after a historic district designation. I'd be interested to see if there is any, you know, studies or evidence to that. I've seen that there are some studies that show that housing prices do go up higher in historic districts relative to surrounding communities. I think that's been demonstrated pretty clearly in Old Town Alexandria, for instance. So I would just be interested to see if there actually is evidence that insurance premiums go up because of historic district designation.
And I don't have, sure, I don't have that on hand right now, but I'm happy to look into that and provide some links or follow up on the website for more information that we can find about that for you.
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you for your comments. Kira, if you want to give someone else, I know we have a couple more hands raised.
We have a hand raised from Anastas Rapetil, and that's all I can see from her name.
Oh, thank you for the effort making my name. Okay, thank you. I know the beginning of this process, but I missed the window of when this went to Fairfax County. And I think both me and my wife, we are opposing this because I don't have trust in Fairfax County management of things. And I need to know, I mean, if you can kind of give me a little bit of, because in this document that is the document that is the nomination form, it's a very funny language. You know, they say almost more than 74% voted for that. My understanding is the Civic Association took this initiative to go to the National Registry, and they did a terrific job with that. You know, it was really kind of really strong community effort. And then, if you know, Civic Association really expanded their purpose, you know, unreasonably to apply for this designation with the Fairfax County, which doesn't make sense to me, but you know, that's me. But I need to know where this 74%, it's about 74.3% or something. It's not 75% of what, you know, of the annual meeting. 20 people that go to the annual meeting and 75% of them voted for that or something else. And then if, you know, I really need to know very well, and we really need to build a transparency on that from these 460 houses that are, you know, selected for that thing, how many of the households really want to do that, you know, really want to move in this direction? Because I mean, if most of the people want to do that, you know, I'm going to probably follow them and I'm not going to complain, but that doesn't make sense to me. The other thing that strikes me here, and it has always struck me about the aesthetics, you know, there is usually very large talk about aesthetics. And then if you look at the additions and renovations, you know, they're anti-aesthetics, you know, to my opinion. And they're anti-conceptual, you know. These are against the concept of Charles Goodman and the modernism, American modernism, et cetera, et cetera. And then if I look here, one of the things that strike me here, for example, in the design, in the draft on the design guideline, page 58 at the middle, if you look at the house on the left side, this house is completely aesthetically destroyed. And they give this house as an example how you can put a sliding door. I mean, this is a complete destruction. Look at the windows, look at the windows on the lower level. I mean, the aesthetics can be completely destroyed by this house. And if these are the people that are going to tell me what to do with my house, I totally disagree with that, and these are just the things that I want to know. But, I want to make sure that we have really the transparency in this, how many people, how this process initiated, where are these 74% coming from, and in the future, how we are going to count the heads, that are going to support this designation, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you for your question. I'm going to defer to the supervisor's office and Nick Reinhardt on that. I do know there was a community survey at the beginning, and I know Nick had already mentioned that we haven't determined a threshold of support yet, but I will say before Nick starts to speak is that the whole reason we're going through this process is it's a public process. There's meant to be outreach and comment and concerns and everything positive, negative included in all of that. So I do understand your concerns, and thank you for explaining them. And Nick, if you wanted to comment on the original survey and maybe moving forward, a little bit of clarity on the support from the supervisors looking for from the community. Nick, I can't hear you if you're speaking. Okay, I know Nick was having some connectivity issues, but oh, yep, there you are. Hi, Nick.
I'm sorry, I still can't hear the audio on the computer, and I'm having trouble speaking through the phone. Unfortunately, when the original community survey was distributed a couple of years ago, I was not on Supervisor Stork's staff. But from my understanding, it was it was driven by the community. I don't know if it was someone who from the civic association who approached the supervisor initially for the initiative, but and I can look into that and just kind of clarify that with the supervisor and with my chief of staff. But I assure you, with this survey coming forward, Laura mentioned, it'll be a more concerted effort to make sure it gets mailed to all properties in Hollin Hills, so they can provide input on it, not just, and we'll be sure to coordinate that so that we capture a larger swath of the community, so they can provide their input on whether or not this goes forward. And I'll be sure to get more solid information about the original survey, but I assure you that this will go to a larger swath of the households.
And I just will add the previous survey was a community-driven survey, and the one that we're doing will be working with our Office of Public Affairs, so it will be coming from the county. So we will be doing a little bit different outreach set for that. But thank you for that comment. Kira, if you have someone else that has their hand raised.
I have Barry W.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for making the time to accept my comments. I really appreciate the work that all the officers of the county have invested into these plans. And I want to make it clear before I go on that overall I support historic preservation strongly and would like there to be even stronger guidelines on modifications or alterations that impact our community. So, I mean, my points are simply that I think there is, in my mind, a big question mark about the relationship between the DRC and the architectural review of the county that you were not able to elaborate on. And I think anyone listening to this call can understand that there is potential for that to create problems for individuals, homeowners later on. My second point is that I think there is a big concern around this question mark or vagueness over what Supervisor Stork calls consensus. This is a politician who has not engaged with community when it comes to the parks project in the past. And when a majority of residents actually opposed that project, crafted a way to suggest that actually there was community support for this project, kind of putting together deliberately putting together the question of the civic association and community, which I think we all understand they are both important, but they are not the same thing. So that's my second. This vagueness over what is consensus sends alarm bells ringing to me, because that sounds like we're going to do it whatever happened. It was published in his paper, get the Hollin Hills district done. So that to me sounds like a question. And then my third and final point is, I don't understand how we can have the Hollin Hills Parks, Goodman and Bricklemeyer designated under the historic district when there is a project about to begin which will completely bulldoze them and replace them with a natural channel design, which is completely not in keeping with what the original design ethos of the landscape was. So, I mean, again, big supporter of the historic preservation, but many questions and very strong concerns about the way that this process is going.
Thank you very much for your comments. I know there were three-part questions there, so I will try to hit on all of them. As I mentioned earlier, it's up to the community. Well, I'll say it like this: the community asked us to do the research into whether or not it was feasible for the historic overlay district to move forward, and that's what we're presenting you tonight as our findings. As I said before, the county does not regulate civic associations or homeowners associations, so we really can't touch the DRC process. I will say there are examples of other places in the county. One of them that comes to mind is the Reston Association that deals with the historic overlay district in Lake Anne and how that process works with the historic overlay district. But it would be up to the DRC to make that determine how that process would be handled. And if it determines that this process is not appropriate, the historic overlay district is not appropriate, then so be it. But this was authorized. We're looking into it, and unfortunately, we just, as the county representative, I just can't comment on the design review committee comments. The question about Hollin Hills Park, that's a great question. So when this first came up as the historic overlay district, we were looking at it, and one of the issues we look at is kind of viewshed protection and buffers from surrounding development pressure. And the opportunity came forward with the Fairfax County Park Authority about adding the parks to the historic overlay district. Now, there are existing historic overlay districts in the county. If you're familiar with Huntley, if you're familiar with, I'm not sure Huntley, Sully for sure, is owned by the Fairfax County Park Authority. And if the historic overlay district is designated, any project they do within the parks that's in the historic overlay district would have to come to the Architectural Review Board for review and approval. So it's not just the homeowners, but it'd also be incumbent upon the Park Authority. They were the ones that had asked us to consider the parks to be added to the historic overlay district. It's an extra level of protection for them as well. But I do agree that sometimes the parks are kind of are really being used as a buffer to protect the kind of view sheds to and from the district and to protect for any future development on the properties. And I think you had one more question, but I didn't write it down. So if you had a third point, I'd be happy to answer it.
Oh, thank you. I think you answered my points. My final point was my concern over this vagueness about what it means, consensus, the fact that you don't have an answer to what you need for this project to move forward. I mean, that fundamentally makes me question why we're having a public meeting at this point, despite the fact that I strongly respect all the work that you've done. And I actually think your document, which I've read in full, is great.
I think the point is we haven't finished our staff report yet. So all these findings will be included in the staff report. But I do feel it is a very strong point to have that document in front of you, the whole picture, all these pieces put together with explanation, so that you can make your own determination upon whether or not you support or oppose the district. So I can't say, I would defer to the supervisor's office on the consensus, but I will say that we will make every attempt this summer to make sure the survey is complete and that everybody has an opportunity to either read the staff report and come to their own conclusions about whether or not they support or oppose the district. Thank you very much for your comment. Okay, Evelyn, it's 8:15. We'll try to go through a couple more questions, but I will say and recommend again, please put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat so that we can make sure we get to them or address them if the issue has not already come up. So Evelyn, if you want to go ahead and give me another question.
The next couple of questions are from Michael. He has a lot of really great questions, but I'm going to choose two for the sake of time. The first is, does the creation of an HOD raise the standard for variances? For example, side property line setbacks?
The answer is no, it does not. And so when you say variance, I'm assuming you're talking about the county variance process and asking for reductions to those setbacks. It does not. That goes with the underlying zoning district. The R2 underlying zoning district has the special permit and variances built into them, and the HOD designation will not change what's allowed by those variances.
The second question from Michael is, does HOD status in any way limit contractor selection or increase contract labor for future work projects due to potential specialization or registration?
The historic overlay district does not give a preferred contract list. So that is not, you can pick any architect or professional that you would like to come in. I can't really comment. I'm not a specialist on the cost of the materials, but I can say that the Architecture Review Board does take that into account. A good example is slate roofs, and there's none in Hollin Hills, thank goodness, but slate roofs are very hard to keep up and very expensive to maintain. And so one of the arguments is that, you know, if you want to repair the slate roof, is it feasible? And when we say feasible, monetarily feasible as well as, you know, economically feasible, you know, environmentally feasible. So all those things are taken into account. And once again, I will say, deferring to the Architectural Review Board members, their expertise in this area really provides an insight to, you know, what we can and can't do. And once again, with 5 architects, we have a lot of experience in the field with materials and options and mitigation efforts. Okay, thank you. Evelyn, do you want to give me one more?
This question is from Mark and Larissa Priest. Is there hard evidence that indicates that the HOD status would affect risk or cost of mortgage insurance? I dispute the truth of Velma Cutler's statement that this is an issue.
I'm going to have to defer that question and research it further and come up with some more information. And I know it's a topic of concern, and we will respond to it and put some information on the website regarding that. All right, let's go. Kira, if you have somebody else with a question.
I have J.G. Harrington.
Thank you. I am curious about something which is, in rough terms, do you have an idea of how many projects from Hollin Hills would be expected to go to the ARB in a typical year?
So I did look, and I'm not a mathematician by trade, so I apologize. You know, rough guesstimate, I call it. But I did look at the years, a couple different years, and how many permits that came in, and with the current standards, how many of them would come to the ARB, and the total number was 9. So of all the building permits that are, of all the houses in the historic overlay, in the Hollin Hills community, only 9, I think it was between 2019 and 2020, so in a 1-year time span, only 9 would rise to the level of coming to the Architectural Review Board. So it wouldn't be that, I mean, yes, 9 is dramatic, but of 470 odd houses, that's not very many. So yeah. Thank you for that question. That was a good one. Kira, if you'd give me someone else. Just a reminder, if you wouldn't mind lowering your hand when you're done, so that we know that we've answered your question.
Mark Babotik.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple questions, and I need to give you the very quick background of why I'm asking, so that they'll make sense. See, in the 54 years since our family's house in Hollin Hills was built, we're the only family that's ever lived there. And now we're looking at expansion and renovation of probably a $500,000 or more project coming up, just early on. And we're not looking at anything that's going to offend anyone. We're talking to a Hollin Hills resident architect who's done other Hollin Hills projects, and you know, no doubt everything will be in keeping. But I'm concerned. Have you done anything to study how much this district will add to the cost of doing an addition? I'm talking about the cost of whatever the permit fee is, and probably even bigger, the cost of how much we have to pay the architect to navigate this extra process. Did you study that?
So there's no cost to come in front of the Architectural Review Board. I understand there is cost to have your architect present at the Architectural Review Board. But as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the documents that you're submitting for your permits, such as elevations, that type of thing, would already be required. So it is a very minimal amount of effort. Now, I understand if significant changes are recommended, that's a large expense to undergo. But I can't estimate those costs for you. But I will say the ARB does do kind of a consultant basis. So if you'd like to talk to one of the ARB members and kind of run their project by you before you come to the ARB, that is something that we are definitely open to and can provide for you. You can also go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just concerned. I can't imagine that it would be normal in your profession to propose some new government regulation without studying and reporting on what the cost of the regulation is going to be. Has that been done?
No, and as I said, the only additional cost, when the ARB does not have a fee associated with it, and it's just, like I said, the only costs that I can see are the additional time for the architect to come to the meeting and to make the modifications that the ARB would recommend.
But you haven't studied how much that's likely to be with a typical one of the 9 annual proposals.
Well, it would vary from project to project, obviously, depending on if it's a deck or it's an addition. But we can try to look into some of that information for you if you like and try to get you some numbers. I'm just not familiar off the top of my head with the current rate of architects, but with one of the 5 architects on the AMB, I'm sure we could provide you some numbers.
Well, I would hope that you would study that as part of the proposal, the cost and benefit of a regulation. But also in a similar vein, have you studied how long this would be likely to delay a project? I mean, I get the sense, though, that our project will probably be through the process before this would get approved. But did you study how many weeks or months this is likely to add to a proposal?
As I mentioned previously, the ARB does meet once a month. And what happens is when the building permit comes in, it immediately gets triggered. We get a flag and a notice that it's in the historic overlay district. So the earlier that happens, the earlier we can get you on the ARB agenda. And the staff works with you to propose for the next meeting. So it's really maybe a month delay that I've seen. It usually hasn't been dramatic as 6 months, 8 months. It's never that dramatic. It's usually maybe a month or two at the most, depending on the completeness of your application, which staff tries to work with you to get you in and get you out. So I can say there hasn't been a large amount of delay in the approvals of these applications for the most part.
Well, that's good to hear, because I have family members in the Northern Virginia building industry, and they say that Fairfax County is a hard place to get things going. But I just have one last question, and that is, where you guys did really impressive work in figuring out what's contributing properties. I looked through somebody did an awful lot of legwork to do. I even learned stuff about our own house from looking at that. But I wondered were you all tasked with figuring out whether there's a problem that need to be solved? Given that we already have our covenants and our architectural review board, was that part of your study, was whether the problem needs to be solved, or you were just tasked with how to solve the problem?
We were tasked with looking and evaluating the proposal of a historic overlay district, and we really tried to be independent from the DRC and the existing design guidelines from that. We didn't take into account if it's a problem or not. We were just asked by some members of the community to look at it, and that's what we're showing tonight.
Thanks so much. As you might be able to tell, I'm not in favor of this at all, but I really appreciate the clearly large amount of work that you all have done on it. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for your comments. All right, we've got about 6 minutes left. So if I'm going to go ahead and take some, please, once again, just a reminder, please put your comments in the chat in the Q&A so that we can get to them if we don't get to them tonight. But I will ask Kira if you can give me another one for people with their hand raised, because I want to make sure we try to get to some of those if they don't.
Kelly?
I was interested in explaining a little bit about how we, as a civic association, initiated our request to the county.
Mr. Kelly, could you just introduce yourself and
I'm sorry.
your relation? That's okay. Just in relation to the civic association.
Sure. Yes. I'm Patrick Kelly, and I'm the current president of the Civic Association of Hollin Hills. When the civic association chose to ask the county for help with investigating a potential historic overlay district, it was in the year 2018. I was not the president at the time, but I was on the HOD committee, and we were tasked with surveying the community. And I know Stas asked earlier, where did the numbers come from, and what do they mean? We actually did reach out to every homeowner that was in the HOD area whose home would be covered by the HOD, and that was 462 homeowners. And of those 462, 335 homeowners, which it wasn't 74%, it was actually 72.5%. And so I overstated that in my message to the community last night. 72.5% of the community expressed interest.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Was that the, I'm sorry, I'm wondering if you got cut off, but is that all you wanted to share with us?
Yes, expressed interest in that. And so that was mostly door to door, but we also had 13 different interest
Mr. Kelly, I think
sessions.
We lost connection with you.
Okay.
We can't hear you anymore, but
I think I can still hear him.
One more second.
Laura, I think Laura is actually having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Laura, can you hear me?
How about now?
You're back now.
Oh, good.
Laura, we can hear Patrick.
Okay, maybe it's just me. Okay,
I think
thank
so,
you.
yeah.
All right. I'll just try to be brief. So we really did reach out to every homeowner, not just Civic Association members. And I have the names of all 335 homeowners who signed a petition. And I went to a lot of doors and knocked on a lot of doors and talked to a lot of people. Not all of those 335 homeowners were sold on whether they would agree to an HOD once they saw what the county plan was about. So I'll admit that of that 335, there was healthy skepticism. But here we are tonight with the opportunity to hear what the county is coming up with, along with our input from our Hollin Hills work group. And so at this point, it'll be the supervisor's office and the county Department of Public Affairs or however, which will reach out this summer to again survey every homeowner either by mail or electronically and try to get a sense of whether that greater than 70% support still stands or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So we have about 1 minute left, so I just wanted to wrap up a little bit and thank everybody for their comments. I know there are still people with their hands up, and I apologize we did not get to everybody, but I thank you for attending the meeting tonight. And please, if you're on looking at the screen right now, there's two names, my name and my colleague, Nicole Brannon. We're happy to take your comments. Also, Nick Reinhardt with the supervisor's office is happy to take your comments as well. And we appreciate all your input. And please know that this is not a preconceived notion for approval. We are doing our due diligence, going through this, looking at all the aspects and how the zoning ordinance kind of outlines how we are to do this process. So I thank you for your time and effort tonight, and thank you for coming out. I think we had a great turnout. I think we had over 120 at some point, so I thank you for that. The documents will be available online, and just a reminder, if you could please have your comments back to us by February 28th so that we can take them into consideration for discussion at our next work group meeting, and we will be responding to your comments online within the next week or two with a document posted on the website. So with that, thank you everybody for your time and effort. If staff would stay on just for a moment at the end to do some wrap up work, I would appreciate it. But thank you everybody and have a great rest of the evening.
Laura, can I add one thing?
Sure, Nick. Sorry, I should have asked you if you had anything.
It's all right. Regarding the point made by Barry regarding a document sent by our office, it was our Mount Vernon advisor that was sent outlining our 2021 goals. There was language in there that stated, and I quote, finalize Hollin Hills Historic District. That was a mistype, and I don't want anyone to misinterpret that as meaning that it is, like Laura said, a preconceived outcome for approval by our office. It solely meant that our goal is to finalize this process, whether it be an approval or a denial of the Historic Overlay District. Again, Supervisor Stork will go with the majority of the community feedback and based on the results of that community survey that was mentioned. So I just wanted to clarify that for everybody, because I know I've gotten a couple questions about it before this meeting as well. So thank you all.
All right, great. Thank you, Nick. And with that, I will conclude the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your time and effort on this. And once again, please feel free to send us any comments as you see fit. Have a great rest of the night, everyone. Thank you.